a hardworking black waitress named Amara thought it was just another ordinary day at the diner. But when she showed kindness to an old deaf lady who walked in alone, she had no idea her life was about to change forever. Days later, a millionaire entered her cafe, and what he revealed left everyone in shock. Every story begins with a voice. Make sure you're here to hear them all. Subscribe now. The sun had just started rising over the small town of Brooksville, painting the sky in soft orange and pink shades. Inside a little corner cafe called Maple Street Diner, the smell of coffee and freshly baked biscuits filled the air. The sound of plates clinking, customers chatting, and the espresso machine humming created a busy morning rhythm. Amara Johnson wiped down the counter, her movements quick and practiced. At 28, she had been working here for almost 4 years. Her shift started every day at 6 in the morning, and she rarely missed a day. Her dark curls were tied neatly behind her head, and her warm brown eyes carried both kindness and quiet fatigue. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a daughter, a sister, and the only person keeping her small family afloat. Her younger brother Malik was in college, and Amara worked double shifts to pay his tuition. It wasn't easy, but she never complained. "Morning, Amara," said Tony, the cook, flipping pancakes behind the counter. "Morning, Tony. We got that bus crowd again?" she asked, tying her apron tighter. "Yep. Couple of travelers, maybe 10 or 12. You ready?" Amara smiled softly. Always. Within minutes, the diner filled up. Customers came in for breakfast before work or before heading out on their travels. Amara moved from table to table, taking orders, refilling cups, and greeting everyone with a polite smile. She was known for her patience. Even when someone was rude or demanding, she stayed calm. Some customers noticed her genuine kindness, while others just saw a waitress doing her job. By 9 a.m., the rush had slowed. Amara finally leaned against the counter, catching her breath. Tony slid her a cup of coffee. "You need this more than anyone." "Thanks," she said with a tired smile, taking a sip. The bell above the door jingled. Amara looked up and saw an elderly woman slowly stepping inside. She was small, dressed in a faded blue dress, her gray hair neatly tied back. She held a small purse and a cane. There was something gentle yet lonely about her presence. Amara walked over immediately. "Good morning, ma'am. Would you like a table?" The woman looked up with a faint smile but didn't answer. She motioned toward her ear and shook her head softly. Amara realized what it meant. The woman was deaf. For a second, Amara hesitated. She had never served a deaf customer before, but she quickly smiled again and gestured for her to follow. She led her to a quiet corner table by the window and placed a menu in front of her. The woman looked at her hands as if trying to speak, but couldn't. She took out a small notepad and wrote something. "Coffee, please, and maybe toast." Amara read it and nodded. "Sure thing. 1 coffee and toast coming up," she said clearly, pointing to the paper to make sure the woman understood. The old lady smiled gratefully. As Amara walked back to the counter, she felt a strange warmth in her chest. Something about that woman felt different, fragile but dignified. Tony looked up. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," Amara said softly. "She's deaf, but she seems sweet." "Be careful," Tony said, half joking. "You always get too attached to customers." Amara smiled. "Can't help it. Some people just need a little kindness." When she brought the food, she made sure everything was right. Hot toast, butter, and a small cup of jam. The woman looked up, smiled, and wrote another note. "Thank you." "You are very kind." Amara wrote back on the same notepad. "You're welcome. My name's Amara." The woman's smile deepened, and she scribbled a short reply. "Nice name. My name is Helen." And in that simple exchange, over a cup of coffee and a small notepad, something began to form. A connection neither of them expected. As the diner quieted down, Amara checked on Helen a few more times, making sure she was comfortable. Helen finished her meal, wrote another small note, and placed a few bills on the table before leaving. Amara picked up the note after she left. It said, "You remind me of someone I once knew. Thank you for your kindness." Amara stood still for a moment, reading those words again and again. She didn't know why, but they touched her deeply. She tucked the note into her apron pocket without realizing that this simple act, helping a deaf old lady, would soon change her life in ways she could never imagine. The next morning started like any other. The same smell of coffee, the same quiet chatter, and the same rhythm of footsteps across the tiled floor. Amara had just finished serving a table of travelers when the bell above the door jingled again. She looked up and froze for a moment. It was Helen, the same elderly deaf woman from yesterday, wearing the same blue dress and carrying the same little purse. Amara felt a smile form on her face before she even realized it. She quickly grabbed a menu and walked over. "Good morning, Helen," she said warmly. Even though she knew the woman couldn't hear her, Helen's face lit up when she saw her. She waved softly and took her usual seat by the window. Amara brought over coffee without needing to ask. "The usual?" she wrote on the notepad and slid it toward Helen. Helen nodded with a gentle smile. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the cup. Amara noticed something new this time. The old woman's hands were covered in faded bruises, not fresh, but old enough to look worrying. Amara wanted to ask what happened, but she hesitated. She didn't want to make her uncomfortable. Instead, she just wrote another note. "How are you today?" Helen looked at it, paused, then smiled faintly and scribbled back, "I am fine, just lonely sometimes." That small reply broke something inside. Amara. She felt the pain in those few words. She knew what loneliness felt like. Coming home to silence, working late shifts, having no one to talk to except customers who came and went. She wrote again, "You can come here anytime. I'll make sure you're never lonely here." Helen looked up with moist eyes, then smiled and nodded. That morning, Amara made sure Helen's toast was extra warm, that her coffee stayed full, and that she didn't feel ignored. When Helen left, she placed a folded napkin on the table with another note. This time, the handwriting looked slower, shakier. It said, "You remind me of my granddaughter. She was kind like you." Amara folded the napkin carefully and slipped it into her apron pocket. Just like the first note, she didn't know why she kept them. Maybe because Helen's words felt like pieces of something beautiful and fragile. Days passed, and Helen started visiting the diner almost every morning. Sometimes she only ordered coffee, sometimes tea and pie. She always sat by the same window, always smiled at Amara, and always left a little note behind. Each note told a bit more about her. She lived alone, her family far away. She had lost her hearing years ago after an illness, and she once worked as a school teacher. Amara found herself looking forward to those visits. In between all the noise, stress, and endless serving, Helen's quiet presence brought a strange peace. Tony noticed it too. "You've got a new friend, huh?" he said one afternoon while flipping pancakes. Amara laughed. "She's special. Reminds me of my grandma." Tony nodded. "Careful, though. You get attached too easily." Amara smiled faintly. "Maybe, but sometimes people just need someone to care." That night after closing, Amara cleaned Helen's table one last time before locking up. She found one more note hidden under the salt shaker. It said, "Thank you for your kindness, Amara. You have no idea how much it means." Amara stared at the note for a long moment. The handwriting seemed weaker than before. She didn't know it yet, but that would be the last note she'd see from Helen for a while. 3 days passed. Helen didn't come. On the first day, Amara didn't think much of it. Maybe Helen wasn't feeling well. On the second day, she started to worry. By the third day, she couldn't hide her concern anymore. The table by the window sat empty, her table. Every time the doorbell rang, Amara looked up, half expecting to see that familiar blue dress, but it was never her. Tony noticed her distraction. "You okay? You've been staring at that table for an hour." Amara sighed. "She hasn't come in for 3 days, Tony." He shrugged. "She's old. Maybe she's resting." Amara shook her head. "It's not like her. She never missed a morning." At the end of her shift, Amara made up her mind. She couldn't just sit and wonder. She remembered that Helen once wrote her address on a note when explaining she lived nearby. A small house on Birchwood Lane, just 5 blocks away. After her shift, Amara changed clothes and walked there. The evening air was cool, the sky painted in shades of gray. When she reached the house, she saw a small white fence, a mailbox, and a front porch filled with potted flowers. But something felt off. The windows were closed and the porch light was off. She knocked on the door, waited, and knocked again. No answer. She was about to leave when a middle-aged man from across the street called out, "You looking for Helen?" Amara turned. "Yes, sir. I'm her friend. I work at the diner." The man's face softened. I'm sorry, miss. She fell sick 2 days ago. An ambulance came and took her to St. Mary's Hospital. Amara's heart dropped. Is she okay? I'm not sure. She lives alone, so the hospital might still have her there. Without thinking twice, Amara thanked him and hurried toward the bus stop. She reached the hospital 20 minutes later, her mind racing the whole way. At the front desk, she spoke quickly. I'm looking for a patient named Helen, elderly woman, lives on Birchwood Lane. The nurse checked the records and nodded. Room 214, second floor. But visiting hours are almost over. I just need a minute, Amara pleaded. The nurse nodded kindly. When Amara entered the quiet hospital room, she saw Helen lying in bed, pale but awake. A nurse was checking her IV. Helen turned her head and smiled faintly when she saw Amara. Amara walked closer, her throat tight. Hey, she whispered, even though she knew Helen couldn't hear. She took out a small notepad from her purse and wrote, I was worried. How are you feeling? Helen read the words, smiled weakly, and wrote back, I am fine now. You didn't have to come, dear. Amara wrote again. Of course I did. You're my friend. Helen looked at her for a long moment before her eyes filled with tears. She reached out a trembling hand, and Amara gently held it. In that quiet hospital room, Amara felt something deeper than sympathy, a connection like family. She stayed with Helen until the nurse asked her to leave. Before going, she wrote one last message. I'll come tomorrow. I promise. Helen smiled and nodded, pressing Amara's hand softly before she left. As Amara walked out of the hospital, she didn't know that this promise, this small act of kindness, would soon reach far beyond anything she imagined, because someone else would soon walk into Maple Street Diner looking for Helen, and Amara's entire life was about to change. It was 3 days after Amara's hospital visit. The diner was steady with its usual morning crowd, but Amara's thoughts kept drifting back to Helen. She'd visited her again, yesterday, bringing flowers and a slice of pie from the diner. Helen had smiled brighter than Amara had ever seen her, even managing a small laugh when Amara tried to mimic sign language from a YouTube tutorial. Now, as Amara refilled coffee cups and took orders, she kept glancing at the clock, thinking she'd stop by the hospital again after her shift. Around 10:30 a.m., the bell over the diner door jingled. A man stepped inside, tall, dressed in a charcoal gray suit, with polished black shoes that looked expensive enough to buy a week's worth of groceries. His presence instantly drew attention. Even Tony peeked out from the kitchen window. The man scanned the diner slowly, as if searching for someone. When his eyes met Amara's, he gave a polite nod and walked toward the counter. Good morning, Amara greeted with her usual warmth. Would you like a table or a seat at the counter? He hesitated. Actually, I'm looking for someone. His voice was calm but carried a weight, like he wasn't used to asking questions. An elderly woman named Helen. Small gray hair, always carries a cane. Amara's breath caught for a moment. You know Helen? Yes, he said quickly. Do you? Amara nodded. She comes here almost every morning, but she's been in the hospital for the past few days. The man's expression changed, concern mixed with relief. Hospital? Which one? St. Mary's, Amara replied softly. She's recovering, but she was alone when she got sick. I've been checking on her. The man exhaled deeply and rubbed his forehead. Thank God someone was there for her. He extended his hand. I'm Daniel Matthews. Helen is my grandmother. Amara froze for a second. Your grandmother? Daniel nodded. I've been overseas for work. My assistant told me she wasn't answering calls. I flew back as soon as I could. She didn't tell me about this place. Amara's heart swelled with emotion. She loves this diner. That's where I met her. Daniel gave a faint smile. Then I suppose I should thank you. She doesn't open up to people easily. Amara shrugged softly. She's special. It's hard not to care about her. He looked at her for a moment, almost studying her. You said she's at St. Mary's? Yes, room 214. I'll go there now, he said, pulling out his phone to call his driver. But before leaving, he turned back to Amara. Thank you for telling me, and thank you for being kind to her. Amara smiled. Please tell her I'll visit tomorrow. Daniel gave a nod and left. The diner door closed behind him, leaving Amara standing quietly at the counter. She couldn't help but feel a little proud that she'd done something good for someone who clearly meant so much to others. Tony leaned out from the kitchen. Who was that? Amara took a deep breath. Helen's grandson. Looks like he's doing well for himself. Tony whistled softly. I'll say, that suit costs more than my car. Amara laughed lightly. But deep down, she wondered about Helen's life. How this woman who lived so simply, so humbly, had a grandson who looked like he came straight from a boardroom. The next morning, Amara woke up to her phone buzzing. It was Tony. Hey, Amara, you might want to get down here early, he said quickly. There's something going on at the diner. Amara frowned. What's wrong? I don't know. There's a black SUV outside and a couple of people in suits. They're asking for you. She rushed to get ready, confused and half nervous. By the time she reached the diner, 2 luxury cars were parked out front. The sight felt strange. Way too fancy for a place that mostly served truckers and locals. When she stepped inside, she saw Daniel sitting at Helen's favorite table. He stood as soon as he saw her. Amara, he said with a genuine smile. I'm glad you came. She blinked, still catching her breath. Is everything okay? How's Helen? Daniel's smile softened. She's doing better. The doctors say she'll recover fully. She wanted me to thank you in person. Amara let out a breath of relief. That's good to hear. I was worried. Daniel motioned for her to sit. I actually came here today because my grandmother insisted, she said. Go to that diner and tell Amara. She's part of the family now. Those were her exact words. Amara smiled shyly. That's very sweet of her. Daniel nodded. But there's more. She told me everything you did. How you helped her, visited her, and treated her with kindness, even though she couldn't hear you. You have no idea how rare that is. Amara shook her head slightly. It wasn't a big deal. Anyone would have done the same. Daniel's expression turned serious. No, most people wouldn't. My grandmother told me something else, too. She said you reminded her of someone she lost long ago. My mother. Amara looked down, touched by the thought. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and took out an envelope. She asked me to give you this. Amara blinked. What is it? Just something small, Daniel said. Please open it. Amara carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a folded piece of paper, a handwritten note from Helen. The same kind handwriting she'd seen before. It said, My dear Amara, thank you for reminding me what kindness looks like. You didn't know me, but you treated me like family. In a world that often looks past the elderly, you looked at me and saw a person. That means more than you know. Please accept this as a small gesture of gratitude. Beneath the note was a small bank slip. Amara's eyes widened, and it was a check. She read the amount twice to make sure she wasn't seeing wrong. $25,000. Her mouth went dry. No, this must be a mistake. Daniel smiled softly. It isn't. My grandmother wanted to help you the way you helped her. She said you mentioned paying for your brother's college. She wants you to use it for that. Amara's hands trembled. I can't take this. I was just doing my job. Daniel leaned forward. Sometimes doing your job with heart makes all the difference. You didn't just serve her food. You gave her dignity. Tears welled in Amara's eyes. She covered her mouth, shaking her head slowly. I don't know what to say. Just say thank you, Daniel said gently. It'll make her happy. Amara finally nodded, whispering, Thank you. The moment hung in the air. Quiet, emotional, almost sacred. Tony peeked from the kitchen again, confused as ever, and Amara laughed through her tears. Daniel stood, buttoning his jacket. She'll be discharged tomorrow. I'll bring her here. She insists on having your pancakes again. Amara smiled, still wiping her eyes. Then I'll make sure they're perfect. As Daniel left the diner, Amara sat down for a moment, holding the note and check in her hands. Her chest felt warm, not because of the money, but because someone had seen her heart. She looked at Helen's empty seat by the window and whispered, You really didn't have to, Helen. But thank you. Outside, the black SUV drove away, leaving the quiet diner bathed in morning light. Amara folded the note carefully and slipped it into her apron pocket, right next to the others Helen had written. She didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. Helen's story, and her connection to Amara, still had more to reveal. The next day was unusually quiet. Amara cleaned tables and waited, her eyes drifting again and again toward the diner door. She knew Helen was being discharged that morning, and she hoped the two of them would get to share one more breakfast together, just like before. At about 11 a.m., the sound of a car pulling up made her look out the window. The same black SUV stopped in front of the diner, and Daniel stepped out, helping Helen down carefully. Amara rushed to the door. "Helen!" she said softly, forgetting that the woman couldn't hear her. But Helen smiled when she saw her, waving as she slowly made her way in. Tony peeked out of the kitchen and grinned. "Your favorite customer's back." Amara led Helen to her usual table, now set with fresh flowers and a warm cup of coffee. She had written on a piece of paper before they arrived. "Welcome back. Helen, we missed you." Helen read it and laughed silently, her eyes bright with emotion. She patted Amara's hand. Daniel sat nearby, watching quietly as the two women interacted. There was warmth in his eyes, the kind that came from seeing genuine care, not pity. Amara noticed Helen's energy was better today. Her hand still trembled slightly, but her smile was stronger. She sipped her coffee, looking around the diner as if trying to memorize every corner of it. Daniel spoke softly. "She keeps talking about this place, you know. She says it reminds her of a diner she used to go to when she was young." With her husband. Amara smiled. "I'm glad she likes it here." After Helen finished her meal, Daniel looked thoughtful. "Amara, do you have a minute? I'd like to tell you something about her. About us." Amara nodded and sat across from him while Helen slowly wrote something on her notepad, humming softly to herself. Daniel took a deep breath. "You see, my grandmother hasn't lived an easy life. She lost her husband 30 years ago. He was a mechanic who built a small garage business. When he died, she took care of my mother alone. Then my mother passed away when I was 12. She never really recovered from that." Amara listened quietly, her heart heavy. "She lost her hearing a few years after that?" Daniel continued. "And slowly she withdrew from people. Even from me sometimes. I was too busy building my company and I guess I didn't realize how lonely she'd become. Until you came along." Amara blinked. "Me?" Daniel nodded. "You gave her what money couldn't. Attention, warmth. She told me you reminded her of the person she used to be before life made her hard. Before she started believing that the world had forgotten her." Amara looked at Helen, who was now smiling faintly while sketching something on her notepad. A simple drawing of two women sitting at a table, one young, one old, both smiling. "I didn't do much," Amara said softly. "She was just someone who needed a friend." Daniel smiled. "That's exactly what made the difference." Amara stood and went to Helen's side. The old woman showed her the little drawing. Amara laughed softly, her eyes glistening. She wrote below it, "That's us." Helen nodded proudly, placing her wrinkled hand over Amara's. It was a small moment, simple, wordless, but full of meaning. When they left that afternoon, Helen hugged Amara tightly. Daniel thanked her again before guiding his grandmother to the car. As they drove away, Amara stood at the diner window watching, unaware that Helen's story had one more secret to reveal, something that would soon turn her life upside down again. A week passed. Business went on as usual at Maple Street Diner, but something felt missing. Without Helen's quiet smile at the corner table, mornings felt incomplete. Then, one evening, as Amara was closing up, her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Hello, is this Miss Amara Johnson?" a woman's voice asked politely. "Yes, who's calling?" "This is Anna Lewis. I'm Mr. Daniel Matthews' assistant. He asked me to inform you that Mrs. Helen Matthews has passed away." Amara froze, the words hitting like a wave. What did you say?" "I'm so sorry," the voice continued gently. "She passed peacefully in her sleep last night." Amara sat down slowly at the counter, her eyes stinging. She couldn't speak for several seconds. "Mr. Matthews wanted you to know that she spoke about you constantly in her last days. She called you her angel." Tears rolled down Amara's cheeks. "Thank you for telling me," she whispered. After the call ended, she sat there in silence, staring at the table where Helen used to sit. She could still see her, the way she smiled, the way she wrote her notes, the way she made Amara feel that simple kindness still mattered. Tony walked out of the kitchen quietly. "Amara, you okay?" Amara wiped her eyes. "Helen's gone, Tony." His face softened. "I'm sorry, kid." "She was more than a customer," Amara said, her voice breaking. "She was like family." Tony placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Then she was lucky to have you." The next few days went by slowly. The diner felt emptier, but Amara found comfort in reading. Helen's old notes, the ones she'd kept in her apron pocket. Every word reminded her that she had made a difference in someone's life. One morning, a letter arrived at the diner. It was addressed to Amara Johnson. The handwriting was elegant, familiar. She opened it carefully. Inside was a short message from Daniel. Dear Amara, my grandmother wanted you to have something. She left specific instructions in her will for you. Please come to my office tomorrow at 10 a.m. Daniel Matthews. Amara read the letter twice. Her heart pounded. Why would Helen mention her in her will? The next day, she wore her best outfit, simple but neat, and took the bus to the tall glass building downtown where Daniel's company was located. The receptionist greeted her and guided her to a large office overlooking the city. Daniel stood up when she entered. His face looked tired but kind. Amara, he said softly, shaking her hand. I'm glad you came. I got your letter, she said quietly. I still can't believe she's gone. He nodded. Neither can I. But she made sure she'd be remembered. The way she wanted, through kindness. He walked over to his desk and picked up a folder. Before she passed, she asked me to handle a few personal matters. One of them involved you. Amara frowned slightly. Me? Daniel opened the folder and handed her a document. She left this to you. Amara looked down. It was the deed to a small cottage on the outskirts of Brooksville. The same house Helen had lived in. Her mouth fell open. Her house? Daniel nodded. Yes, she wanted you to have it. She said you reminded her of home, that you'd keep the place filled with life. Amara's eyes filled with tears again. I can't accept this. Daniel smiled faintly. You can, because that's what she wanted most. For someone kind and genuine to carry on her warmth. She said this house should belong to someone who knows how to make people feel seen. Amara held the papers close, her heart full of emotions she couldn't describe. She didn't have to do this. Daniel shook his head. That's exactly why she did. They both stood in silence for a moment, looking out the office window at the distant streets below. Finally, Daniel said quietly, My grandmother didn't believe in coincidences. She believed people met for a reason. You and her, that was one of those reasons? Amara smiled through her tears. I believe that too. A few days later, Amara stood outside. Helen's little house on Birchwood Lane. The late afternoon sun cast golden light over the front porch, and the flowers Helen had planted were still blooming gently in the breeze. Amara held the keys Daniel had given her, still unsure if she was ready to step inside. It felt strange, like crossing into a memory that wasn't hers. But when she unlocked the door, the smell of lavender and old books wrapped around her. It was quiet, peaceful, and deeply familiar. Everything was just as she remembered from the day she came looking for Helen, the white curtains, the bookshelf by the window, the worn rocking chair beside it. Amara walked through slowly, her fingers tracing the back of the chair where Helen used to sit. On the small table beside it was a folded envelope with her name written on it. Her heart skipped a beat. She picked it up carefully and sat down before opening it. Inside was a handwritten letter. My dear Amara, if you're reading this, it means I have gone where pain no longer exists. I don't want you to be sad, dear one. I want you to smile, the way you always did when you brought me coffee. You gave me something that no doctor, no medicine, and no money ever could. You gave me companionship. I had spent years in silence, believing the world had forgotten me. Then one day, a young woman smiled at me without judgment, without pity. You reminded me that kindness still lives in the world. This house is yours now. I trust you will fill it with laughter, love, and the smell of coffee again. Maybe you'll plant new flowers in the garden, or invite someone in who just needs a place to feel seen. That's what this home should be. Thank you for being the light I thought I'd lost. With love, Helen Matthews. Amara pressed the letter to her chest, her eyes full of tears. The house suddenly didn't feel empty anymore. It felt alive, filled with Helen's warmth, her stories, and her quiet strength. She walked around the small home, noticing family photos on the shelves, Helen as a young teacher, Helen with her late husband, and one of a smiling boy who must have been Daniel. On the kitchen counter sat a small music box. Amara turned the handle, and a soft, nostalgic tune filled the air. It was delicate, beautiful, and for the first time in days, Amara smiled. She whispered quietly, Thank you, Helen. I'll take care of it. I promise. Months passed. Life moved forward, but Helen's memory stayed close to Amara's heart. She decided to make something out of the gift she'd been given. Not just the house, but the lesson it represented. With the help of Daniel, who often checked in, Amara renovated the little cottage into a cozy coffee shop called Helen's Corner. It wasn't fancy or modern. It was warm, welcoming, and full of stories. Photos of Helen hung on one wall, along with a simple sign that read, "Kindness is the language everyone understands." People from the neighborhood started coming in, some out of curiosity, others for the peaceful atmosphere. And just like Helen, many of them came back. One day, as Amara served coffee to a group of regulars, a young woman walked in. She looked nervous, holding a worn backpack and a small notebook. "Hi," she said softly. "I'm new in town. Do you have any work available? I can help clean tables or wash dishes." Amara smiled, the same kind smile that once greeted Helen. "What's your name?" "Tracy." "Well, Tracy," Amara said, handing her an apron, "you start tomorrow, and coffee's on the house today." Tracy blinked in surprise. "Really? Why?" "Because someone once showed me kindness when I needed it most. Now it's my turn." The girl smiled shyly and sat down. As Amara walked back to the counter, she noticed Daniel standing near the doorway. He'd come quietly, watching her with admiration. "You did it," he said softly. Amara looked around the little cafe. "No, Helen did. I just followed her heart." Daniel smiled. "She'd be proud of you." They stood there for a moment, listening to the laughter and the gentle clinking of cups. The place that once belonged to a lonely old woman had become a home for strangers, a reminder that kindness could rebuild anything. 1 year later, Helen's Corner had become a small-town treasure. People came not just for the coffee, but for the warmth that filled the air. Travelers stopped by, regulars brought their families, and the walls were now covered in thank-you notes from customers, whose lives had been touched by Amara's kindness. Amara had also started a small scholarship fund for local students, named the Helen Matthews Fund. It helped young people who couldn't afford college, just like Amara once struggled for her brother. One quiet afternoon, Amara sat by the window, the same way Helen once had. The sunlight streamed in, and she felt a familiar peace. Tony, now the manager at the diner, dropped by holding a bag of pastries. "I still can't believe you own a cafe now." "I miss my best waitress," Amara laughed. "And I miss your burnt pancakes." They both laughed, remembering how far things had come. Just then, a little boy walked in holding his grandmother's hand. The boy waved shyly. "Hi, can we sit here?" Amara smiled warmly. "Of course, anywhere you like." As she served them, she noticed the grandmother writing something on a piece of paper. When Amara came back with their coffee, the old woman handed it to her. It said, "Thank you for your smile. It reminds me of someone I used to know." Amara froze for a second. The handwriting, the simple words, they brought Helen rushing back in her memory. She smiled softly and whispered, "You remind me of someone too." When the pair left, Amara stood by the window watching them go, just like Helen once watched her. Then she looked around at the little cafe full of laughter, conversation, and life, and she finally understood. Kindness never really ends. It just changes hands. She placed a fresh flower on the counter beside Helen's photo and whispered, "You were right, Helen. People meet for a reason." Then she turned to greet a new customer walking in, her voice bright and welcoming. "Good afternoon. Welcome to Helen's Corner.